Cool. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. This week I'm going to be chattering with Lito Velasco, who I will introduce in just a few moments. Before I do, there are just a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. Actually, one of them, just having to share this and flip things around in order to be able to share this with you. It's always the way. The technology always defeats me at some point. Literally just before I started chattering to Lito earlier on today, this was sent through to me from a guy called Andrew Jesus Hunter. This is a Maninkineko, a Japanese. This is a lucky cat done as a chatterer, and apparently the Japanese says angel in the middle of his chest and demon on his shield. Or perhaps it's the other way around. I'm not sure. But I wanted to share those. I'll be sharing that on my Facebook. But check out Andrew's stuff. And apparently he's going to be doing a female Cenobite and a Butterball Cenobite as well. He's going to be working on those at the moment. But yeah, so I thought, I thought that was a great deal of fun. Oop, it's all right. I've just got a zooming thing happened on my screen, so I now can't see. Yeah, I can just see myself. The other thing I wanted to share with you before we go any further is that I've been talking to the Soska sisters, Jen and Sylvia Soska, and they have agreed to come on the show again. Yay! We haven't sorted out a date. It will be sometime in November or December. I've just got to wait for them to finish off their ADR and Elevator stuff, but yeah, they've agreed to come back on the show, so watch for postings of that. There is no show next week because I'm away in Sheffield at Celluloid Screams, as are the guys behind Leviathan. Chris and Gary, etc., are going to be there, and we'll be talking about the Leviathan CD a little bit later on as well, as Lito composed the music. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share. And now just say hi, Lito. Hi, Lito.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining me this week. And before we started, we just wanted to point out to people that Lito has some Leviathan CDs still available. Is that right?
I do.
But only very few, only about 20 or so?
I only have about 23 left, and if people are interested in picking up a copy of that, they can reach me through my Facebook page or through Google+. You can just, type in my name in the search bar and find me there, but it's easier through Facebook. It's facebook.com/Hollywood Lito. So yeah, there's 23 left out of 100. So get them while they're there.
That's great. Yeah, no, absolutely. So very limited, and it's a wonderful score. It's really, really wonderful score.
Thank you.
And as I say, we'll talk a little bit about how that came about, etc. You're also involved in a thing called Scream Queen. That's Scream, Queen.
Exclamation point.
Exclamation point. Yeah. It took me a while to work that one out. I was like, oh yeah. And this is all about Mark Patton, who starred in Nightbreed 2. Is that right?
Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Not Nightbreed 2. What am I talking about?
We're very Clive Barker.
Yeah,
we're very focused. Yeah, Scream Queen is all about Mark's journey as an actor. He wants to really tell his story about how he got involved in acting, how he got involved with Nightmare 2, how he kind of got chased out of the industry in some ways. I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything. He can tell the story much better than I can, but it's basically Mark's life story, because he disappeared for a really long time and no one really knew where he was or heard anything from him until 2010, when we started producing the Never Sleep Again documentary. And we started talking to each other, and everyone on the crew kept saying, well, we can't do a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, focus on that without finding Mark Patton. So it kind of became the team's focus to find Mark Patton, and the director, one of the co-directors, Dan Ferens, finally tracked him down in Mexico and put not like actually went to Mexico, but he finally found him there.
Driving around looking for an actor.
Yeah, with bloodhounds, on the beach. But he finally found him there and put a, you know, feeler out to him and said, we're doing this documentary and we need you, you know, we can't tell this story without you. And he kind of came out of the hiding that he was in and did the interview. And while he was there, you know, once he was wrapped, he was like, thanks for having me. And this was great. And someone on the team mentioned to him, Mark, you know, people have been clamoring to see you for, you know, almost 30 years now. And he was so taken back. He was kind of like, they have? And then we started telling him people do conventions and shows and they've been asking, why aren't you involved? And he was kind of like, they do? Like he didn't know about this whole world of conventions and fandom. And so honestly, Dan and Andrew and Tommy, the guys, the three big, you know, brains behind Never Sleep Again, they kind of introduced him to this world. And ever since then, he's just kind of taken off because he falls in love with his fans and they fall in love with him because he's such a nice guy. And, you know, it's cool because it's really changed his life and has made him see how truly appreciated he is by the fan base. Because he had no idea. He thought he was sort of reviled because Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 and Part 6 are sort of the black sheep of the series that people are like, we don't really talk about those. I mean, to some, not to me, of course. I love them both for different reasons, but he had no idea that he had this kind of fan base. So he wants to tell this story because it really is a fascinating story when you think about where he started and how big he was and how he just kind of disappeared. So
I watched Nightmare on Elm Street 2 the other day, and I'd not seen it before.
Oh, really?
I remember Nightmare vividly, but I'd never seen. It's one of those things, you know, because of course when those things came out, you either saw them in the cinema or you didn't see. Eventually, you might get to see them on VHS.
Oh yeah.
Eventually, if you like. But then again, they went really, really quickly, and if you missed them, then they were gone.
Right.
It's not like these days where you had that, you know, Amazon didn't exist in those days.
You didn't have instant play.
Yeah.
You know, online, on demand.
Yeah, yeah. None of that stuff. You know, it was really, and I just never got to see it. So I was really quite, because I'd heard so much and I knew about the documentary and
right.
so on. So yeah, no, it sounds very interesting. So that's on Kickstarter at the moment. I think it's 3 days to go. It's Wednesday that it finishes.
Yeah, 3 days left. They finish on Wednesday. They've got a decent gap to fill. So I'm urging anyone that's watching, please, you know, visit Kickstarter, even if you can only contribute $10 or whatever. Please help Mark tell his story, because then you can help me write another score. And it's interesting because Roman, who's the sound designer for the documentary, and he's also one of the producers and everything. Roman is actually, he was the sound designer for a short film that I just scored called The Confession of Fred Krueger. And that was a movie that was directed by Nathan Thomas Milliner. And that was all about, it's a prequel to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And I got to write a score that was kind of in the style of Charles Bernstein's original score, but it wasn't really that. It was like morphing into what would become Charles's score. It was like growing as the character grew. So Roman asked me to come aboard Scream Queen because we worked together on that short film. And Roman also was aware of my my great respect for and my friendship with Chris Young and the work I'd done on Leviathan. And since Chris scored A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, he was like, we can't think of someone that could capture that sound and that kind of atmosphere without just plagiarizing it better than you, because you can capture that vibe and really pay homage to what Chris did without just, you know, writing the same exact tunes. And I was like, hey, I'm all for that, you know, and any chance to dabble in that world is great.
And Confession of Fred Krueger is available on YouTube now. And if I'm going to I'll put a link up after we've done the show as well. It's very interesting. Again, very well done. Really, not just for your work, you know, overall it's very well done.
Thank you.
But so we've started on Nightmare on Elm Street, but let's rewind back a little bit before you get into all that, because we'll come back to that again, composing and so on. What sort of train is now? I'm looking behind you and I'm seeing an awful lot of Halloween stuff. So I guess you've always been interested in horror. Is that true, or is this something you came to later in life, or where does your interest in horror spring from?
It's It's something I came to very early. My father was always a bit of a horror buff and junkie himself. He was, of course, more of a fan of the films that he grew up with, the Universal monsters and Hammer horror and stuff like that. I think my father was born in, I want to say 38. I hope I didn't get that wrong in case he's watching. Sorry. But so he grew up with, Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and, Lon Chaney Jr. And he actually, my father told me this interesting story when I was a kid and he was introducing me to those films. He said, I had a drink once at a bar in California. I can't remember the city, but it was one of those coastal cities driving up the coast of California. He was at a bar and Boris Karloff just happened to be in the bar having a drink. So he sat down and he said he talked to Boris Karloff for like 2 hours. And he had I think it was after a play that he'd seen that Boris was in. And they went to the bar and Boris was also in the bar. So Boris signed a program and they talked for a long time. And so that kind of really cemented this kind of awe for me as a young boy, like, oh, my dad knew Frankenstein, and what really sealed the deal for me was we had a babysitter when I was a kid named Desi. And Desi was like maybe 19 years old, something like that. And she was very much into the slasher films of the era. So to keep us busy when we were kids, we used to play a game called The Killer. And what she would do is she would put us in our bedroom and she would tell us to lock the door and she would say, don't come out of the bedroom until you know it's safe. And we were like, well, how do we know it's safe? She's like, don't worry, you'll know. So we'd lock the door and she would make all kinds of sound effect noises behind the door and growls and struggles. And she would scream and we'd be sitting behind the door terrified. And then it'd go silent and she would put her fingernails under the door and you could see her painted nails and she'd say, open it, it's safe, it's me. And we open it, she'd be like, don't worry, I got the monster, he's gone. And that was her way of convincing us that there was nothing under our bed. She chased the monster away, we could go to sleep safely. But she also made the mistake of one night, she was babysitting us, she decided we were okay to watch Halloween. And it made its premiere on NBC in 1981. And she sat us down to watch it and my life was forever changed. That movie, I mean, it scarred me, but it also fascinated me. I couldn't, there was something about it that I just was so compelled by, even as a child. And what was interesting was because it was 1981, as soon as the credits, as soon as the film went black, Loomis looks up and looks around and, Michael's gone and you hear his breathing. As soon as it faded to black, when the picture came back up, it was a preview for Halloween 2, which was debuting in theaters that same month. And I remember sitting there watching this trailer and being like, he's not dead. Oh my God, I'm never going to make it through the night. So I was scarred for life, but I was also hooked for life because that feeling of watching a horror film, you get that adrenaline rush. That was it for me. I just became an instant addict. So
that's really interesting because that thing of not being able to sleep after, I've told the story before, Nightmare on Elm Street, I was terrified. I saw it in the cinema. I'm walking home that night after seeing it with the girl who'd seen it with me. We're both holding hands, basically. I'm running from the, it's just like, I really don't understand any of this. I always had the thing that I had to watch a horror movie to the very end.
Right.
Otherwise, I would dream an ending, or I always had to have an ending. As long as I could get through to the end of the movie, even if I knew there was going to be a sequel, as they did with all the Dracula Hammer, Hammer stuff and so on.
Right.
That would,
You had to know that evil was somewhat vanquished.
Yes, absolutely. That there was some sort of dawn happening. But
that there was hope for all of us.
So that started your love of horror, and then what training? What did you train as? Where did you go to school?
I trained as a boy. I started acting when I was really young. I was like maybe 5 or 6 or so. I started doing summer theater. So I had a lot of musical theater training. There was a wonderful couple that ran the musical theater in our hometown. Jerry and Marge Reinhardt were their names, and they had a fantastic music program. And I was always such a ham that they just kind of said, well, he's got it, so you might as well let him flaunt it, let him use it. And so that kind of started me down that path. And then the older I got, the more I started focusing on my music, because I'm a pianist and percussionist as a performer. And then I focused on private schools for high school. My parents, they saw that I had a gift for the arts, so they gave me some schools to look at for high school, and I ended up attending the Interlochen Arts Academy in Interlochen, Michigan, which a lot of names have come out of there. Josh Groban, Jewel, Tom Hulse, a lot of people have gone to that school. So I went there for 4 years and then got out of there, went to the Juilliard School. And then after the Juilliard School, I went to Indiana University. So I've had a lifetime of training on stage, and then of course classical training, both in music and acting. So I mean, it's always been my focus. So you learn a lot, not just from the books and from the teachers, but you learn a lot also by doing. And a lot of my acting training and experiences come just by doing, whereas the music was really by the book, with these teachers that, played with the New York Phil and played with the San Francisco Symphony and Chicago Symphony. That was more structured. My acting is more just make them up as you go, with a little bit of, training sprinkled in here and there. But I really kind of, my lifelong acting hero is Harrison Ford. And it's kind of weird. There's certain parallels. We're both from Chicago, and we both, if you can make believe, you can act. So, and that might turn some actors off. They might be like, he doesn't have any formal training. That's not true. I trained once I got to the town and started really focusing, and I have some method training and stuff like that. So,
and it's very interesting. I was talking to, I was actually reading an interview with a friend of mine, who's an actress called Tanya Moody, who's doing a one-woman show at the Soho Theatre at the moment. So anyone in London for the next couple of weeks, go and see Tanya in a one-woman show. I need to book tickets. I mean, Tanya's worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She's just been at Shakespeare's Globe. She's on the board at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, the big top school in this country.
Big time.
She's an amazing lady. But I think her attitude as an actor always is there is something new to learn. Actors tend to they're always in training. They'll attend some sort of class.
Right.
Some sort, just to keep their hand in, because it's such a precarious profession. And also just to stay at the top of your game, you need to carry on training and so on. So I think that's very much the actor's lot. And there are many actors who never went to drama school who've got great careers.
Of course.
And so, apart from technique, which you can learn at drama school. No, absolutely. Okay, so now you've got a movie out where you played the baddie. Is that right? What's the movie just coming out?
There's a film coming out in this fall. It premieres actually on Halloween at the RIP Film Festival in Los Angeles, appropriately enough, and it's titled All Through the House. And that is really, I play the killer, and I wear a mask, and I have my trademark suit, my trademark weapon, and that acting is definitely not exactly, Royal Academy of Drama acting. But I did, it takes all kinds. I did draw upon a lot of the acting that I learned when I was a kid. I studied, well, not as a kid, I was more like in my teen years. I studied clowning, and we did a lot of Greek theater mask training, where we had to evoke the personality and communicate without talking, but you had to create whatever was on the mask. You had to become that character. So that helped me a lot with that role, because I had to figure out how to communicate with just my eyes, with just my head, with the body, body language. And I'd had a lot of practice doing that, because for years I've appeared, we got a siren going by, apologies to everyone. For years I appeared with Trancas Corporation, who, people that don't know who Trancas is, they do the Halloween films. They own the license to the Halloween franchise with Michael Myers. And you can probably see on the top of my shelf there, good old Michael Myers has been beheaded. That's the reason for that.
Well,
Is
it had to happen sometime.
right? That's the mask from Halloween 20 years later, and at the end of the film, she, whacks him off. Sorry, I've just spoiled the ending for people to a film that's 20 years old. But so for years, I performed for Trancas at conventions and DVD signings and stuff as the Shape, as Michael Myers. So I'd already had some experience performing in a mask. And my friend Todd, who directed the film, Todd and I go back many, many years. He produced a film that I starred in when I got to town many years ago. It was for a film school in Los Angeles, and they hired me to be the lead, and he and I just hit it off because we both love horror and we both love comic books. And so he hired me to play this part, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I did a lot of my own stunts. I got beat up a lot. I fell out of windows. I flipped over couches. I got hit. I did all kinds of things that I never thought I would be doing, but it was fun. It's a throwback retro slasher film. If anyone's
And
into
this is a feature film.
Yeah, it's a feature film, and I think they're playing at festivals starting on Halloween. They've got like 3 or 4 already lined up, and I think they're trying to get a limited theatrical release. I know that they'll definitely do direct to video on demand, and all that stuff, because everybody does that. But I think they're really trying hard to get a theatrical release, and it's an interesting little slasher film, because even though it is retro and even though it is what you'd expect, it's boobs and blood and slasher and practical effects. It's all practical effects. There are some twists and turns at the end of the film that you really, hopefully, will take you by surprise. It's not your average killer that, like Jason, that's just come back from the dead and it's some hulking behemoth. This killer has a real motive and agenda that when it's revealed, I hope some people are going to be a little shocked by it.
Interesting. I look forward to seeing this. Again, regular viewers of the show will know that I've mentioned in the past that when I play my friend, you can just about see in the picture behind me.
Yep.
It's the same thing. I remember doing these lessons where we had to place cardboard boxes on our heads. We weren't allowed to draw any faces or anything, but you had to make the cardboard box come to life. You had to give it a character.
Right.
Very, very useful training for this. For mask work. Very useful. Okay, so that's your most recent acting, is that right?
It is. Well, there's also another film that's in festival run called Demon Garden, and that's a short film. So I don't think that's not going to be seen by a ton of people because it's only playing at festivals. But if there's a festival near you and it happens to be playing, Demon Garden is a film that I appeared in that was directed by my friend Michael Granberry, who's an Emmy Award winner for his animation. He does stop motion animation for Robot Chicken, and he won an Emmy for one of his creations. And an extremely talented, kind, wonderful, benevolent, imaginative man, full of great creative energy and positivity, and he hired me to play a villain. So there must be something to, like I said, people look at me and they see the Bambi kind of Disney eyes. They see these big Disney eyes and they're like, oh, he's so cute. But people who are familiar with my acting, for some reason, they see the darkness that I can tap into, and they like to cast me in these roles, which is fine because they're always fun to play villains. And it's a story about a gangster who is seeking to elevate his status in the underworld, and he turns to supernatural means to do so. And that's about all I'll say. So it's also full of a lot of twists and turns, and that was an interesting shoot because it was a lot of reacting to things that, it's going to be this. So you really had to, okay, what is that going to look like? In my brain, I think it looks like this. So it's kind of that kind of challenge, which was cool, and it was fun. And again, working with my co-star, she was absolutely wonderful, Christina. She was so good, and we're both such polar opposites in terms of our looks and who we are and our age and everything, that it was wonderful on screen to have someone to play off of that was so dynamically different. So if anyone catches it online or at a festival, that's also happening. So
okay, cool. All right, so these sound absolutely fascinating. These sound great. But I wanted to move on to composing. You said you trained at Juilliard. You're a musician, and you're a timpani an orchestral timpani player. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that was my focus for many years. When I went to Juilliard, for some reason, Roland Koloff, who is now deceased, he was the timpanist for the New York Phil, and for some reason, he saw a timpanist in me. I'm not sure why, but I didn't see it because I never liked playing timpani, and I always found it very challenging. But he saw it, and he started me down that path. Excuse me, I have an itch. But then when I went to Indiana University, my instructor there, Gerald Carless, who played with the Philadelphia Orchestra for many years under the great Ormandy and Riccardo Muti, he also saw the same thing. So I just kind of made my way down this path, and before I knew it, I was performing with the Indiana University Philharmonic, and I was playing all the greats like Mahler 1 and Mahler 5 and Sibelius 1 and The Rite of Spring and Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra. And the entire time I kept thinking, I think I'm in over my head. Why am I here? But I mean, after a while, you just kind of, you're like, all right, I can do this. So.
And how long did you do that for?
I was a timpanist and professional percussionist because I performed with symphonies in the area as well. I had jobs that after school I would go to rehearsal, east or west or wherever I had to drive to get to the gig. And I did that professionally for about a good 10, 11 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And okay, so the obvious question in my mind is, obviously everyone knows musicians have to practice.
Right.
But you didn't have timpanis at home, I assume.
No. That would have been interesting, and the neighbors would have loved that. Yeah. He's playing those timpani again. No, what you do is, you have, most percussionists have a thing called a practice pad, and it's maybe about that big, and it's just a round piece of rubber. And then you just practice on that, your technique, and you build up your chops, to build up your speed and your accuracy and your technique. You do that at home, and then when you're attending a university or a conservatory like Juilliard, they have practice rooms on campus. So they have, you have a key to the practice room, and you just go in, and they have a set of kettle drums or timpani in there that you just practice on. The hours they only let you in from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. or whatever, but you have plenty of time within that, space to practice your technique. And also, again, for me, it became, I've always had kind of a gift for percussion that my parents saw when I was very young. So, and this is going to sound horribly conceited, but for me, again, I didn't have to practice quite as much as some people did. And because I spent so much time in rehearsals, because I would perform from noon until 6 p.m. in school, I had percussion ensemble for 2 hours, then I had band or wind ensemble for 2 hours, and then I had philharmonic for 2 hours. And then I would get out of there and go to a job and perform for another 2 hours. So a lot of my practice was just doing it in those situations. And that would be enough to keep my chops up and all that stuff. So that's how I practiced, just got the part, learned it, and performed.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And then, so how did you get into composing? Was composing part of your course anyway? And so how did composing start?
Well, that was really just, that's another thing that I think it was kind of in my blood in a sense. First of all, I should say my grandfather was a professional cellist for a short time. And then my uncle, Bob, who is, I guess he's my great uncle. He's my grandfather's brother. He was a band teacher for many years, and he was a trombonist. And then their other brother, Cruz, also played music. So my father was a pianist, and he studied composition for a few years at Indiana University, but then he had to leave school and, get a job and support the family and all that stuff. So I think it was kind of in my blood because my father helped me learn piano growing up. He kind of taught me a little, and he would always play, at night, like if he had time off, he would play his piano, and he would compose sometimes, and I would watch him and study what he was doing, kind of, as kids absorb a lot. So again, I absorbed a lot just watching what he would do. And then really once I got to, professional training at Juilliard, and well, not professional training, but when I started my training at Juilliard in Indiana, I said, well, I should probably take a few composition courses because, you never know when that'll come in handy. So I did that. And I just found that I had the ability to craft a melody and harmony that worked. I remember the composing faculty was mainly made up of students. For beginner composers like myself, you always had a student teacher who was
Right.
maybe a grad school or a doctoral student, and they were great. So not to take anything away from them at all, but they would always note, they'd get frustrated. They'd be like, your music is it's so conventional. And I would say, well, what's wrong with that? Because they're looking for something more abstract and more avant-garde and experimental. And I've always idolized people like Alan Silvestri and Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams. To me, those people are my Beethoven, my Mozart, my Mahler. And of course, I respect those legends from the classical world as well, but my ear has become attuned to the sounds of film scoring because that's what I really love. So a lot of my compositions sounded more conventional in that regard. I mean, and I remember when we played my first piece at a composing recital, a lot of the student teachers were kind of rolling their eyes because it was so, normal. And one of the heads of the department stood up afterwards and, he gives his notes and critiqued. And he said, this is one of the most well-constructed melodies and harmonies that I've heard in years. I mean, you clearly have a gift for shaping something that makes sense within the parameters of music. And it's quite beautiful. And I remember all the students just being like, what do you mean? Don't encourage this. We're trying to get him out of this. So that really set me on the idea that, okay, so I can craft a melody. So I just studied it there and did my thing, stayed true to what I wanted to do. And then I just kind of did it on and off in my spare time. And then it became something that became a bit of a profession because my friend Scott Shermer, who directed the film Found, which is a disturbing and
I have it on DVD. I swear I got it on. This is where he discovers his brother.
Yes,
has got something nasty in the bag. Yes, I keep on meaning to sit down and watch it. It's got, my big long shelf of DVDs. I was to sit down and watch.
My Netflix list is like 500 movies long, so I'm right there with you. But no, it is so visceral and disturbing and effective, and I mean it's a really great little horror film, but it's not your typical horror film. And Scott and I go way back. We go back to 1996. He hired me for my first job in my college town of Bloomington, where Indiana University is. And he came to me because he was directing this film, and he said, I've got 2 scenes that I can't get scored. For some reason, the composers I'm working with are just having a hard time getting what I want. And so I said, well, what do you want? Like, what are you looking for? And he sent me the clips of the footage from the film, and then he sent me the temp tracks. And I said, oh, I can do that. That's no problem, And I sat down and I turned something around for him, and I turned it in, and he was just blown away. I mean, the thing with a composer is we always say, oh, yeah, I can do that. And then you get that person out of your sight, and you go, holy crap, what am I going to do? Yeah. I mean, it's like every time I take a role, it's like, in Demon Garden, I was like, oh yeah, I could play this with my eyes closed. And then you leave that meeting and you're like, what did I just do to myself? It's like, so I thought I could do it. I turned it into him. And when I got his feedback, he was just over the moon for it. And the film premiered in Los Angeles at a film festival that Elvira hosted and put on because she chose it at a contest in Indianapolis as the best film in that festival. So it got the honor of being played in Los Angeles. And when she saw the film, Scott introduced me to her and told her the 2 scenes that I had scored. And I'd like to think it was genuine, not just her blowing smoke up my butt. But she said that she thought that the music in one scene in particular was the best track in the film. And she sat and she talked to me about it for like 5 minutes and how it made her feel and this and that and the other. And of course, being the pig I am, the whole time I'm just staring at her boobs. But some part of what she said actually resonated with me, and it made me think I'm a pig. I'm very honest about my piginess, but it resonated with me, and I thought maybe I can do this. So another friend asked me if I could score his short film. I did that, and then another friend. It just kind of builds from there. You never really know when you become a composer. You just kind of start doing it. I think it's like acting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something you kind of have to do and want to do again and again and again. Now, we've had some questions come in whilst we've been talking.
Sure.
So,
no.
Well, that was a short show.
I'm leaving. Let me get my magic 8-ball.
Yeah. I've not heard it called that before, and I think I like that idea. When you aren't composing, I'm going to come back to composing, but when you aren't composing, what kind of music do you listen to?
I have very eclectic taste. I listen to everything. I listen to one of my favorite rock bands of all time is Garbage. I love Garbage. I love stuff from the 80s. I love punk from the 80s. I love a lot of the music that was sound from the soundtracks from John Hughes films, some of the, kind of punk crossover rock stuff like Pretty in Pink. And I love the Cocteau Twins. I love Seal. I love Duncan Sheik. I love the Beatles. They're my favorite ever. I listen to their catalog repeatedly every year. Obviously my number one ever is John Williams. I mean, he is my favorite, and I listen to him all the time. Alan Silvestri, Jerry Goldsmith, Christopher Young is one of my favorite composers. Michael Kamen, God rest his soul. James Newton Howard is probably my second favorite composer working today. And then of course I listen to classical music too, just to kind of keep it in the back of my mind. I love Mahler and Beethoven and Stravinsky, Shostakovich, some of Prokofiev. I'm not a huge fan of Schumann and Schubert, but I love Brahms.
I never liked the shoes.
Yeah, I've never been able to figure it out.
It just, so depressing.
Yeah, it just doesn't appeal to something in my brain. It doesn't appeal to. It's the same way my father and I have this kind of ongoing debate over the decades where, my guy is Beethoven, and he sits on my piano here, which I'll give everyone a look real quick. I'll turn my camera. This is my workstation, which is right next to my computer. So I can just turn it on and play as I look at the screen. And I've got my Fright Night, which my wife got me to put me in the mood for my next assignment. But Beethoven sits here on my piano, and he really appeals to my sensibilities as a musician and composer. And my father's favorite is Bach. And again, those are two very different styles. They're two very different composers, and they're two very different sensibilities. For some reason, Bach, I respect him, but he just, to me, it's so overly complicated and Baroque that I'm like, can you take like 5 of those lines away and distill it to something a little more
very
harmonious? I mean, I respect the crap out of it. Don't get me wrong. It's like Bartok. I really love Bartok. I respect the heck out of it, but I would never, aside from one of the tracks on Leviathan, which was very much inspired by Bartok for very specific reasons, I can't compose music like that because it's just not how my brain works. And Schumann and Schubert are the same way. I get them. I respect them. I respect their place in history. I would just never be like, hey, it's time to listen to some Schumann. It's just not me. So that's a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that answers.
That's complete. It's not long-winded. That's just the complete answer.
Right.
So,
and Ben Folds. I almost forgot Ben Folds. I love Ben Folds.
And and actually, just let me throw one more name at you.
Sure.
Mikko Tania, who composed the soundtrack for Soma. Have you heard of Mikko Tania?
I have not.
I've not heard of Mikko Tania. This is my mate Derek, who's asking this question. That's your answer, Derek. We'll go away. Actually, I really should watch Soma. But okay, so that's what you listen to when you're not composing. How do you approach this guy? So now I know as a writer that when I start writing a story, it'll be a phrase, or it'll be an image that I have in my mind, or it'll be a situation that'll just say, oh yes, and then if that's true, then possibly that would happen, and
right.
then so. Is that how music works? How do you start composing something?
Well, there's so many different ways to do it. There's so many different processes. It's like acting. It's all, there goes Harley, or my wife Jennifer wearing her Harley top.
Oh right. She was spotted by one of the viewers and saying hi.
I adore Harley Quinn. So Anyway, so the way that I do it is every actor or every composer has a method, I think, that's like actors. I mean, even if you use a method that's similar, we all have our own way of, tweaking that method. Because I've grown up listening to composers like Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, Alan Silvestri, James Horner, Danny Elfman even, These are all composers that, to me, composed in the very romantic style of composition. They very much ascribe to the leitmotif and melody way of composing, which is what I love, and that's what I do. And it's very challenging right now because a lot of composition in this industry now, producers for some reason are trying to get away from melodies. They're trying to get away from leitmotifs, and it's difficult for someone like me because that's my entire method. I look at a film, and the first thing I do is I'll sit down with the director, and hopefully he's also the writer. That makes it much easier. And I'll say, what are you hearing? Are you hearing something? Do you have temp tracks? Do you have a composer that you think this should sound similar to? And then they'll either give me a temp track, or they'll say, well, I want it to be in this style. And then I'll start giving them examples like this composer, like this track. And then they'll say either yes or no. And then I just kind of go off from there. And I'll say real quick to any filmmakers that are watching this, please don't get too attached to your temp tracks, because even though they are helpful in a sense to composers, they are also, it's like shackles, because I can't tell you how many times I've been given a film with temp tracks and I turn in my version of that sort of sound, but with my sound combined. And the first thing they say is, no, it's not enough like the temp track. And it's so disheartening because we're thinking, well, that's because I want it to sound like me. And also because I don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to go to court because you want it to sound just like Mrs. Doubtfire. Like, I can't do that. So, I mean, temp tracks are helpful in a way. Sound and ideas of sound. Again, directors, be as specific as you can. Like, if you want more brass, if you want more strings, if you want it dark, if you want vocals, if you want rock, if you want it to be a waltz, be as specific as possible, because a lot of people come to us and they say, well, I'm not sure what I want, but I'll know it when I hear it. That's like it's like asking a writer to turn in 72 different drafts of a script before you decide which one you want to film.
I'd like to go somewhere. You take them to Glasgow. Yeah, but I didn't want to go to Glasgow. Yeah,
right.
Like, yeah, absolutely.
Well, you didn't tell me where to go, you know.
Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Like telling to the I want to go somewhere, Mr. Taxi Driver. Yeah.
Let me throw a dart at a board. And so, I mean, it's good to have something in mind, a concept, because that way we know, we have a point of reference and we know which direction we're heading in. It's just, and we all know that there's going to be revisions. There's always going to be revisions. It's so rare that you actually nail it the first time out. And even if you do nail it, it takes tweaking and polishing. So we're not opposed to revisions. It's just when you have no idea what you want, the composers kind of on the inside just panic, because we end up having to do 20 times the amount of work that we would normally do. So, I mean, literally, it helps to be specific. I go off and I look at the film, I watch the film, I spot the film, I tell them where I think music needs to be, and then I turn that spotting session into them and I say, do you agree? And then they'll either agree or disagree. Most of the time I've gotten it right, I think, and they'll only have minor suggestions. And then I'll just go off and do my thing. And I really just try to approach it with every piece I do, every piece of work, I should say, everything I score has to have some sort of theme. It has to have a melody. And then when you're dealing with multiple characters, there's, on my Facebook page, I have a bunch of videos, and on my YouTube page, I have a bunch of videos too with works that I've done. And there's a film called The Briefcase. And The Briefcase was the first film that I actually scored. It was a short film, but I very much approached it in that vein. Every single character, every single idea, every single concept, every object had a theme, because these things all worked around each other in ways that were very, you know, convoluted, and every single one of these things forwards the plot, as with every film. So I like to give them an identity. So when they appear or when they motivate the film, you can hear something like, oh, hey, that's that theme from before, because that thing is happening. And then I just kind of write the music from there, depending on what they've given me. Some assignments, like this one, which was the score to The Confession of Fred Krueger, that was easy because he told me, Nathan said, just make it sound like Charles Bernstein without copying Charles. And Leviathan was, I'm not going to say Leviathan was easy, because it wasn't. It was a lot of hard work.
There's 9 hours of material. How long is, I know because I've got the CD or downloaded the track, but how,
right.
how much music did you have to provide for Leviathan?
I did 74 minutes of music. The thing that made Leviathan a real challenge was when you think of Chris's work on Hellraiser, it has such a specific sound and such a specific atmosphere and vibe. And you think of that theme, and those strings are so silky and seductive and beautiful and lush that I really had to do a lot of work from my end, because a lot of that work is done on this, and it's done on the piano, and you have to make those things sound like real strings, which is difficult because no matter how good string samples get, they almost always never sound like a real orchestra. So that was the challenge with that score. Was it wasn't writing the theme. In fact, when Gary asked me to do the score in, I think it was February of 2014, when he first approached me, I was working a day job at the time, and I drove home and I sat down at the piano, and within 2 hours I had a theme for the show. And that to me was the easy part. The hard part was making sure it sounded as much as it could like Chris's work, and honoring the legacy of his sound and his beautiful creation. So it didn't just sound like a bunch of really bad synthesized strings, you know. So
and I just wanted to clarify, just for in case there anybody who doesn't know, we're talking about Leviathan, the Hellraiser documentary, which is the interview documentary with Hellraiser and Hellbound. Christopher, we're talking about Christopher Young, who composed the score to Hellraiser. You've met Christopher. You had discussions with Christopher, is that right?
Yes, I did. In fact, here's another little. Here's me and Christopher on the set of Never Sleep Again. I was lucky when we were producing the documentary Never Sleep Again. He came in because he scored A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, as I mentioned before, and we got to interview him. And I sat in on that interview because the directors kind of figure, they're like, well, you know music better than we do. So if we miss something, or if you think there's something that needs to be zeroed in on, just point us in that direction. So that kind of started my relationship with Chris. I talked to him and we hit it off. And from that point forward, we've stayed in touch. And I see him at a lot of events. Chris is very much like I am. I think he's a bona fide geek at heart, and he loves horror and he loves Halloween. So I see him at Comic-Con, I've seen him at WonderCon, I see him at Monsterpalooza in Burbank. It's funny because one time I saw him at Comic-Con and I was dressed as the Joker, and my wife was dressed as Harley Quinn, and we walked up and we said hello, and he was kind of like, yes, and because he wasn't sure exactly, and I was like, oh, it's me, Lito, and he's like, oh, I didn't recognize you, and that. So, but Chris and I, we hit it off and we're friends, and I approached him as soon as Gary asked me to do the documentary. I called Chris and I said, look, here's what I want to do. I want to write something that sounds like it came from your world, but is colored with my palette as well and has my sound as well. But I really want to honor your legacy. And he was so humble and so generous. He said, oh, I don't want you to be saddled with my stuff. And I said, first, it's not saddling. Like, I'm honored to play in your sandbox. And it wouldn't make sense to me to do music for a Hellraiser documentary without it sounding like Hellraiser. So as long as you're okay with it, I won't use any of the actual themes or melodies. I'll write my own, but it's going to sound like it came somewhat from your brain. And he was like, you have my blessing, go for it. So that was an honor and also a great privilege. And it made my job, again, easier, because I'd say a good half of the CD is very much Chris Young influenced. And then another half is very much from my world. I mean, there are tracks that people will hear that are like, that's definitely him, and that's definitely him. So I was able to blend them somewhat in the title theme and all that stuff. But, that was just a great thing to do. And I actually, yesterday, he was signing CDs of the new Nightmare on Elm Street box set. They put out a box set of all the soundtracks, and I picked this up, and he was signing the box set there. And I actually presented him with his copy of Leviathan, the CD, and I told him, I'm sorry this took so long. Here it is. I hope you love it. I hope I honored you. And so.
Oh, lovely. Absolutely lovely. And I just want to rewind a bit before we start talking about
Sure.
Fright Night, and just go a little bit more into the technical details. So we talked about the tracks that are direct, the temp track that a director will sometimes. So basically, just for those who don't know, the process is that basically they will do a final edit of the movie before you get to see it. Is that right?
Hopefully it's a final edit. Sometimes it's still a work in progress, but they'll give you as close to a final as they can, and it has a little time code at the bottom of the screen, and sometimes it has a temp track attached to it. Most of the time, in my experience, what happens is they'll give me the film without the temp track, but they'll send me the track that they want it to sound like in a separate file. And then that's just known as the temporary track. That's what that is. And that's what they hear. You know, it's like when when George Lucas was finishing Star Wars, he used a lot of The Planets by Holst. And he told John Williams, this is what, we're editing to. So if you can kind of create something in this vein, that would be great. So that's just one instance of, temp tracks. If you watch the movie Tommy Boy, it's a comedy from the 90s with Chris Farley, you listen to that music and it's very clear that the temp track they were using was Mrs. Doubtfire, because even though I love David Newman's work, it sounds very much like they kept telling him, no, make it sound more like Mrs. Doubtfire, more like Mrs. Doubtfire. So that's what temporary tracks are for, because it's what they become used to hearing and used to seeing the movie play with, and they want that vibe. And so the composer then has to either recreate it or create something that's close to it. And it's led to problems. I mean, I know Sam Raimi and Danny Elfman had a huge blow up on the set of Spider-Man 2 because Danny Elfman told him, I think, in fact, he said, if you want it to sound more like my track from Spider-Man, he said, if you want it to sound more like my track from the original Spider-Man, just use that frickin' track. And he apparently stormed off the set and everything. I mean, I don't know if that's true. It's kind of urban legend, but I mean, I know they had a lot of problems scoring that film, and I think that's why, because Sam kept telling him, no, more like this, more like this, more like this, and Danny was kind of like, I'm done. So
it's interesting, very, very interesting. Because
again, I don't know if it's true, so no one's.
If I ever get to meet Danny Elfman again, I think I've got to meet Danny Elfman once.
Ask him, yeah. See how that goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Particularly,
I've heard that you stormed off the set.
I suspect I was probably under Kinski makeup at the time, anyway. So yeah, it's not. Yeah, because what I find fascinating, of course, is there's a when you're looking at a film, and I imagine the film director's process and the editing process is there is a rhythm, there is a natural rhythm to each scene. Ignoring music for the moment, there has to be a rhythm to that, yeah. And I can imagine that you were talking about the timestamp across the bottom of the screen,
right?
Do you see that even if you're not got the tune? Does it become clear to you that's where the beat has to fall?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's like I would tell someone in that regard, go, if you want to see how I do that, check out The Briefcase, and also go on YouTube and find the film we were talking about called The Confession of Fred Krueger. There are obviously certain beats in there where I'm looking at a scene and I'm writing a track and I say, okay, this music has to fall with when that person turns their head, or it has to fall with when the main title appears, or it has to fall on where there's a scare, or it has to fall on when the detective pulls the famous glove out of an evidence envelope and is looking at it. We've got to hear Freddie's theme that I compose. Like you have those kind of rhythms. An interesting example of what you're talking about in terms of editing rhythms would be there's a scene in The Confession of Fred Krueger where Freddie is telling the detective he's reminiscing about his first kill. And it's flashbacks set against modern, like what's happening in the present. And there was a definite rhythm to that I had to match, not just because it was shifting scenes, but the music itself in present day was so different from the flashback music. I had to be sure it matched up perfectly, which involved mixed meters. It's not just like 4 beats to a bar. You're dealing with 7s and 9s and 5s, and you have to line it all up before you can even start composing. And then that's where I go from there. I look at those bars and I say, well, this is going to be tough. There's a bar of 7, there's a 5, there's a 3, and then it goes to 2 bars of 4 and 7. And that might not make sense to people, but when you're dealing with mixed meters, it's more complicated because you can't just write a standard tune, in 4. You have to really make sure that the rhythms match up and you're not overlapping. And that's always a challenge, but it's part of the fun. It's like a puzzle. It's like figuring out, how do I make these pieces fit?
That's very interesting. That is very interesting. For those who, not musicians, we're talking about the number of beats in a bar. Normally they tend to be consistent as you go through the, you have your time stamp at the beginning, you have your time at the beginning of the piece of music.
Right.
It tends to stay that throughout the majority of the music. What you're saying is that those bar counts change.
It's like if you listen to a piece like the Indiana Jones theme, that's in 4 beats. Dun 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 dun. Oh, sorry, I can't do music. But
you're humming, you're singing. That's fine.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay. So
Google let us get away with that one. But yeah,
okay.
We've got the tune in our head.
So you've got the tune in your head. It's in 4 beats. But then sometimes you have, like a composer that I was talking about earlier, Bartók and Shostakovich and Stravinsky. A lot of their pieces are not in standard beats. They shift beats all over the place. So as a performer, you're constantly having to be very wary of the time signature, the beats per bar. And when you're composing, it just prevents you with a challenge. Jerry Goldsmith was notorious for using mixed meters. And that's one of the guys that when I get into that territory, my music tends to sound a little more like his stuff, because that's the influence that I have. Okay, if I'm a mixed meter, I know who to turn to for mixed meter. That's Jerry Goldsmith. And John Williams does it too. Any composer worth any salt can do it. It's just certain composers tend to use it more than others.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And whilst we were talking, quick anecdote, we were talking about Doctor Who before we started the show tonight. Have you ever come across a spin-off program called Torchwood?
Yes.
Yeah. Murray Gold, who composed the new Doctor, the theme music for the music for the new Doctor Who
the series.
Yeah, brilliant composer. I love telling the story that John Barrett, you were talking about themes for characters, in one of the shows, that John Barrowman's theme was based on the phrase, "Here he comes with his bloody big tractor. Here he comes with his bloody big tractor."
Right.
Just that.
Yeah. Even that.
Yeah, absolutely. Something saying in that, because that's what the thing was showing. And he was composing at 2:00 in the morning, and that's all we could. That's all we could think about.
Well, he got it out of his head.
Yes, absolutely. You got to get it out of your head. We're coming towards the end of the show, but before we do that, I'd like to talk a little bit. You've done Leviathan. Then another project you're working on with Dead Mouse, of course, is You're So Cool, Brewster, the Fright Night documentary. Yay!
I'm a walking plug.
Actually, if you'd just like to do that again, because I think they were looking at me rather than looking at you. Oh, no. There we are. Yay! That is brilliant.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. So where are you up to with that? How far are you into it with that one?
I'm at the point now where I'm just sketching themes, and I'm sketching material. I haven't seen footage. I know that they're editing, and I think they were still actually culling some interviews. I think these documentaries tend to be a really long process, and you're never quite sure where the end line is unless you have a set release date, and I don't think we do. I think it's just kind of a general, like spring 2016.
Yeah.
But I'm just sketching themes myself. I'm putting ideas in the memory banks of my synthesizer, and using whatever comes out of my head as kind of basis for whatever I end up doing. When I spoke to Brad Fidel when we interviewed him at his home, I told him, I said, I use the same approach. I said, I want this to be reminiscent of your work without copying it. And he was very much like, I understand that you can make it sound 80s, just try not to make it sound like I composed it, which is a different challenge for me, because usually Charles Bernstein and Chris, both those guys were like, go for it, just don't use a theme so the movie studio doesn't come after you. But Brad's was a little different. So now I have to try and figure how to make it fit into that era of sound without making it sound like Brad. So that will be an interesting challenge, because there's a very definitive sound to Fright Night, like to the theme for all for the lead vampire, whose name at the moment is escaping me. Jerry Dandridge. Thank you. I know Chris Sarandon. I'm thinking that's not his name, but his theme is so iconic. You know, "Come to Me" is a very iconic, well-known theme, and it's like I have to be careful not to tread too closely. So.
Ah, interesting. Very, very interesting. Funnily enough, I know everyone. I've done a complete show on original versus remake on Fright Night. I have to say, I really enjoy the theme tune to the remake of Fright Night.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite. Whenever I'm sitting down to write, and I think, and I may have mentioned this on the show before when we were talking. Chris, myself, Doug, Simon, Barbie. It wasn't at Monsterpalooza, it was on the other coast. But Chris was there, and it was the first time we sat down and we actually had a panel with Chris Young. And Doug was saying that Chris's theme was so strong, whenever he had to go and play Pinhead again, before he'd walk on set, he'd just play
the theme.
And it's the same when I was writing Hellraiser comics and so on, to put you in that space. You just, this is the power of music, I think, for both performers and the cinema goers.
Yeah, and go ahead, sorry.
No, you carry on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, that speaks to the power of the music, but it also speaks to the prowess of the composer, because I remember John Williams once saying, in regards to, I think it was either Star Wars or Indiana Jones, he said that, he just, when you're constructing those themes, you just kind of try again until you get to the theme that sounds like it fits the world and the character so well that it's always been there. You just happen to find it somewhere, either in your brain or on the wall or whatever. And that's something, themes like Halloween, themes like Chris's Hellraiser theme, themes like Jaws, themes like even Danny Elfman's Batman theme, the Superman theme by John Williams. These are themes that are so memorable, not just because they're so well composed, but because the composer finds that tonality and that identity and that kind of that mode of the film so well that you can't imagine anything else playing along with it. And as a composer, that's about the highest honor that you can ever get. For a film composer, at least, I think, if you're able to create something like that, you've done your job and then some, in a way that we all aspire to. And that's really what it's, all about. You just want to create something that's memorable and is lasting and serves the story and the characters, because that's our job. We're there to serve the story and the characters and the director, not to make it ours. I mean, you can make it yours in a way, but you have to really support everything that's there without stealing the show.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. There's a couple more comments I just want to share with you.
Sure.
Do you ever write music that could be put in for Creative Commons licenses? It's so hard to find good music for when I do my Storytime Sundays. This is from one of our viewers who has his own channel, and he does creepypasta, I think, and does readings and so on. So do you ever write for Creative Commons? It's
interesting. I just finished an assignment for a television commercial, where they wanted me to compose 7 different samples. And then they were going to choose from those which one they like best, and then we'd go off with it and evolve that one. And I came up with 7 different things, and they chose their one, but I was left with 6, I call them really good starts. So I hadn't done it before. I kind of always worked assignment by assignment and just did what I had to, because my time I'm always balancing different projects. But I have 6 really good starts that I think I'm probably going to evolve into 3 or 4 minute tracks and then put out for use, because I don't want to waste them. And, they are good starts. So I probably will start to think of doing things like that more. I also have a SoundCloud account, and I have tracks on there that if someone wants to use, they can definitely approach me. I'm not going to say for certain, but at the same time, I might say, yeah, you can use that. That's fine. I mean, because I have I'm not going to say extensive library of music, but I have a building library of music, and it's only used once a lot of the time. And sometimes people never hear it. So I'm like, you know what? Yeah, let someone use it, because then it gets my sound out there, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So there's that answer.
And this is from Craig, my husband, sitting downstairs. He says, from me, please let Lito know there is a very large spider on his kitchen light.
Oh my God. That's just Harrison, we call him. That's Harry the tarantula.
That's Harry the tarantula. He's
huge. You can guess why he's called Harrison.
Yeah. Lito, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. There's been a real insight into the kind of your methodology and how film scores are put together and so on.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. What else are you working on at the moment? We mentioned Leviathan, we've mentioned Fright Night. Is there anything else you can tell us about that you're working on at the moment?
I'm producing a short film that's going to film at the end of November and beginning of December, and it's based on a very well-known franchise / property. I can't say what it is yet, but once I have the green light, I'll put that up on my Facebook page. I'm also helping convert the Nightmare on Elm Street book that we wrote, the hardcover coffee table book that's like that thick. Excuse me, we're converting that to softcover for release next year. I'm working on a fundraiser that I have to be sure to mention on my Facebook page. And also if you go to facebook.com/madloverscosplay, my wife and I cosplay as Joker and Harley, and we do fundraisers every fall for my aunt who is battling cancer. And my father as well has had some really serious heart issues this year. So we're going to be raising money for both of them. And what we do is we have a fundraiser on GoFundMe? GoFundMe.com. People can find the links on my pages. And what we do is we put characters up, and we're going to use Harley, Joker, and then we've recruited a bunch of friends like who are playing Selena Kyle, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy, and the Penguin and Bane, and all these other characters. And what it is the more money we raise, the more characters we will include. And at the end of the fundraiser, we'll film a video featuring all those characters getting in like a massive pie fight and all kinds of slapstick ridiculousness. So if the viewers want to see a particular character get their just desserts, they have to contribute money for that character to be involved. So we're doing that. That's very important to me. And also on my Facebook page, I will be selling pictures that my cosplay friends and I did as a tribute to my very good friend. Well, not my very good friend, but a friend of mine. He was an acquaintance, more of a friend, the late, great Wes Craven. We did a cosplay tribute to him as the characters of Michael, Freddy, Leatherface, and Jason. We took the picture in front of the house on Elm Street in Hollywood, and all the proceeds from those pictures are going to cancer research, specifically brain cancer, and we're donating it in Wes's name. So those are two causes that are very dear to my heart, aside from all the work that I'm doing. I'm keeping myself busy. I have a marriage. I see her on the couch from time to time, just kind of hi and continue my work. So.
Yeah, it's Craig is
That's life.
Involve Craig as much as possible, just so I see him occasionally. Right. Absolutely. And just to remind people, you have 23 Leviathan CDs left, which you can order through the Facebook page. Don't check out the Mark Passon Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare. I can't remember what the subtitle is.
That's it. My Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, My Nightmare on Elm Street. I knew it worked somehow.
You got it.
Those links are going to be up on the YouTube channel. On the YouTube there. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, Lito. As I say, folks, no show next week because I'm going to be in Sheffield at Celluloid Screams. As I say, they will also be selling the Leviathan DVDs there as well. So I will look forward to seeing some of you in Sheffield. And then I will announce, hopefully in the next week or so, I'm trying to put together the following week's show and November. At the end of October. Lisa, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Go Cubs. Go Cubs.
I have no idea what that means.
That's okay.
All right, then, mate, this has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince, and I've been chattering with Lito Velasco. Good night, everybody. Good night.